Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Max Velocity weather forecast. And in today's forecast, we'll be breaking down the threat for another severe weather outbreak from the central and southern plains back through the Mississippi Valley later this week. This will bring the threat for damaging winds, large hail, and tornadoes. I'll give you the latest breakdown and everything that you need to know in this forecast, but let's first begin with what's happening across the United States today that will lead into that severe weather potential later this week. We're going to begin with the Gulf Coast, and believe it or not, we actually have a subtropical storm that is currently developing just south of Louisiana. This is bringing the threat for tornadoes over the next 24 to 48 hours to those in the southeast United States, and the threat for some flooding rains. But the overall general weather pattern that we have right now is this omega block. We have a jet stream. We basically have a very strong ridge over a large chunk of the United States, and this is keeping a large chunk of the country very, very dry and as well as warm right now. But this will not last too much longer because we have another trough that'll be impacting the United States going into Thursday, Friday, and Saturday of this week. So this is what the jet stream looks like now. These are your upper level winds. So back down here to the south, that's where we actually have an upper level low, pretty weak surface low. This is bringing the threat again for maybe a subtropical low with maybe a few tornadoes and as well as flooding rain. This is primarily going to impact those though across areas near the Gulf Coast and as well as down through the southeast. On the other hand, we have our jet stream back up here to the north with a very dominant ridge, but this will again not last too much longer because over the next several days the jet stream is going to begin to dip. This dip is going to occur back over in the northwest United States, which you can notice here there will be a low pressure system and it'll be negatively tilted. What this means is that it's going to be able to pull more moisture out of the Gulf of Mexico going into both Friday night and Saturday to increase the risk for severe weather. Once we go through Saturday and into Sunday, that low pressure system moves over into the Midwest, and you can notice again very strong low pressure system here back just to the west of Chicago and as well as again in the Midwest here. And eventually going into Sunday and into Monday, that low pressure system will move off to the east, bringing the risk again for some flooding rain and as well as the threat for severe weather across a large chunk of the United States. And by next week, we should get another ridge, but once we go into late next week, which is very far out, I'm just mentioning it, there's a chance for another trough that could also bring severe weather. So really, we're gonna have a little break in the action going into early next week, but we'll likely return to more severe weather sometime mid to late next week. But we do need to keep the main focus on what's happening over the next several days because we'll have a chance for severe weather both Friday, Saturday, and Sunday across certain sections of the United States. So let's kind of take you through what that looks like. Beginning with tomorrow, that surface low, really again in the subtropical system, will eventually make landfall. This will bring the threat for maybe a few tornadoes and along with that some flooding rain. And then going into Friday, that is when that surface low begins to develop over the central United States. This is what's going to bring the threat for severe weather over the next several days in certain sections of the country. So going into Friday night, the risk of severe weather is primarily going to be from Kansas back through Texas. That risk will shift off to the east from anywhere even in the Midwest back through the lower Mississippi Valley on Saturday. And eventually going into Sunday, there might be a risk of some severe storms back through the Northeast and Ohio Valley. But really after Saturday, there is still some uncertainty of how severe these storms will be and really the general characteristics of what this low pressure system will be by that point. But we'll have more details on that as we get closer. Now, in terms of the severe weather threat for Friday, there is currently a slight risk for severe weather from Kansas back through North Texas. This is going to be mainly for the threat of large hail and damaging winds, but there's also a chance for maybe a couple of tornadoes with any discrete supercells that do end up developing on Friday night. And in addition to that, we'll have another chance for severe weather on Saturday. That's going to extend from southern Illinois back through areas in northeast Louisiana. We'll have the main threat for damaging winds, large hail, and maybe a couple of tornadoes with this event as well. Now, with this severe weather event in particular, there are a ton of problems with the overall setup, especially for Friday night. So I want to kind of take you through where the greatest risk of severe weather will lie, and as well as what the risks will be and what the issues are for the overall severe weather threat. So we're going to begin with Wednesday into Thursday. Again, we really won't have a whole lot of pulling moisture up to the north until really going into Friday. That is when that low pressure system centered over the United States will have a strong southerly wind pulling a ton of moisture into the southern and central plains. Dew points into the low to mid 60s will be enough for severe weather and as well as enough buoyancy. And even going through Saturday, there is going to be enough moisture for severe weather as far north as the Midwest. So really the overall moisture and as well as again the dew points are not really going to be an issue with this severe weather event. Another thing that'll be in place is the instability, especially across Kansas and back through Texas going into Friday night. There will be enough instability for severe weather. But if you're not familiar with what instability instability is. It's essentially like putting gasoline into a vehicle, but in this sense, it is what helps to fuel severe storms. And we'll have plenty of that even going through Saturday. You can see the gray color up there. That's going to represent at least some instability. It's not much, but it will be enough for at least some sort of marginal, maybe slight risk of severe weather back up that direction, and maybe another risk for severe weather going into Sunday night. Now, let's talk about the problems with the severe weather event, one of which is the upper level winds. I showed you the jet stream earlier. This is the same thing. The upper level winds, you might notice there's hardly any across the southern and central plains. What this would mean is that we would really not see a whole lot of lift, and the updrafts would be pretty weak, and they would only be very short-term thunderstorms with upper level winds like this. So that is a really good positive for us, especially in the southern plains. Now, once we go into Saturday, it will likely increase, at least into Saturday and Sunday. We'll have an increased severe weather threat most likely due to the fact the upper level winds will intensify, which means updrafts in the thunderstorms will last longer, meaning we'll have some more long track supercell potential. In terms of the low level jet, this is what rotates supercells closer to the surface, and going into Friday night, there will be a low level jet. I say a low level jet. It's not going to be very strong, but there will be enough of some low level winds to be able to create maybe an isolated tornado threat or two. And eventually going to Saturday, that threat may increase slightly across areas in Arkansas, Missouri, Western Kentucky, and Tennessee. And then once we go into Sunday, that threat might also still be existent across the mid-Atlantic region in the Northeast. So something to be very mindful of. But the winds aloft are really the biggest issue with this severe weather event. So what are we looking at in terms of the timing, and as well as will we see any supercells? Well, beginning with Friday night, that is when we'll see the threat for maybe a few supercells to develop near that low pressure system. Another issue that we have is the capping. There will be a temperature inversion, which means clouds will not be able to build up past a certain height, especially in the southern plains, so severe weather will likely remain limited in Texas and Oklahoma if any storms are actually able to beat the cap. But the ones that will likely beat the cap are going to be back up here in Kansas. That is where more significant severe weather will likely occur going into Friday night. Eventually going into Saturday, that threat will start to shift back over to the east. And for those back through the Ohio Valley and as well as the Midwest, the severe weather potential is primarily going to exist on Saturday. That is when a linear line of storms will likely end up developing. We might see a couple of discrete cells. This doesn't seem to be as bad as what we've seen recently, but we will probably see at least some scattered damaging winds, isolated large hail, and maybe a couple of tornadoes. And once we go into Sunday, that risk of severe weather does shift further over to the east. Now, one last thing I want to talk about, there is a threat for tornadoes tomorrow. That is Thursday in the United States, primarily across Alabama back through Florida. And this is all going to originate from that subtropical low. We'll see some showers and storms on those outer bands going into tomorrow morning, and as well through the afternoon. A few of these might produce a few tornadoes, and once we go through the evening, that threat will still exist at a marginal scale, and then by the overnight hours, that threat should very well diminish. And thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe down below and like the video.